Thanks for giving me this opportunity to speak to you about our campaign to stop the industrialisation of St Fitticks Park in the Torry area of Aberdeen. So Torry is separated from the rest of Aberdeen by the River Dee, centuries of history and a very different culture. Until 1891, Aberdeen was a city with two universities in the north bank of the Dee, and Torry was a large fishing township on the south bank. In 1876, a ferry overloaded with Aberdonians travelling to a fair in Torry sank with the loss of 32 lives, leading to the building of the Victoria Bridge, which joined the two settlements, and shortly after that, Torry became part of Aberdeen. Torry's wealth came from fishing and fish processing and from building and repairing ships. Then the oil industry arrived in Aberdeen at the beginning of the 1970s. It enriched Aberdeen and it impoverished Torry. Their industries were sacrificed for the new industry. When Shell decided to build a base in Aberdeen, the fishing village of Old Torry, up until then a candidate for a conservation area, was in the way. The council took out compulsory purchase orders on people's homes and bulldozed the place in 1974, replacing it with a COMA site, a control of major accident hazard sites. As an aside, about 100 of our friends from Climate Camp Scotland occupied the site where the fishing village once was as a demonstration of solidarity with our struggle earlier this year. And I thank them very sincerely for that. It was a real boost to our morale. Industrial estates were built on the outskirts of Torry to service the oil industry, and it's now become the site for every unwelcome development in Aberdeen. Industrial estates, a stinking sewage treatment works, two closed landfill sites, two large harbours, one of the most polluting roads in Scotland, a large incinerator 500 metres from the primary school means that Torry is now a residential area contained within an industrial estate. It's one of the most deprived communities in Scotland, where people have a life expectancy 13 years lower than in the leafier suburbs of Aberdeen. One accessible green space remains, St Fitticks Community Park. St Fittick was shipwrecked there in the 7th century. When his foot touched land, a spring of healing water appeared. It was a place of pilgrimage. The people built a church and then a manse with a wee farm round it. The church is still there, surrounded by the graveyard. It remained a sacred place, a place of worship for the people of Torry until 1829. The East Tullis burn ran through it and down to the sea in the Bay of Nig. For the children, this park was the fieldy. It was their play park. At the start of this century, the park was pretty degraded. The manse was gone. The East Tullis burn had been culverted beneath the industrial estates. The water was grossly polluted and ran to the sea in a deep, straight, narrow drainage ditch. The minister's glebe had become rough grassland. The children of Torry still played in the fieldy. Our friend Joyce Faulkner, a Torry quine better known as Rasheen from River City, joined us last year on a litter pick and sang, accompanying herself on the ukulele to the tune of Woody Guthrie's "This Land is Your Land." This field is your field. This field is my field. This field belongs to you and me. It was for her a beloved spot, the place where she had played as a child. As the millennium began, the local community decided they would raise $250,000 to install play equipment and access pass in the park. They raised £168,000. Aberdeen City Council stepped in to make this up to the target sum. Trees were donated by a conservation organisation. The community planted 10,000 trees in 5 hours in 2003. In 2012, the council decided to improve the condition of the burn. Using funding from SEPA, Aberdeen Green Space, Total and others, the channel was restored to a more natural appearance. Pond areas, reed beds, wetlands were introduced to clear the water. More trees were planted. Work was completed in 2014. The biodiversity and attractiveness of the site have improved year on year since. It's rich in bird life and a migration stopover site. It's well used, well loved, and has won multiple environmental awards. It's the last remaining accessible green space in an area unfairly burdened by pollution, where few people have private gardens. Now this space too is under threat of industrial development. Organisations that had become rich and powerful from the oil and gas industry in Aberdeen thought it would last forever. One of these was the harbour. In 2010, jam-packed full of oil service vessels, it decided to expand into Bay of Nig, separated only by the coast road from St Fitticks Park. The site doesn't have anything a modern harbour needs. There are no transport links, offices, warehousing, fuel stores. Concerns over the threat to the park were allayed by a legal agreement between the council and the harbour board that the park would get environmental improvements and outdoor classrooms as compensation for the loss of the bay, and harbour associated industry would go to the industrial estates. The harbour board weren't alone in thinking that the fossil fuel industry was here to stay. Large sums of public money are given to regions for infrastructure projects in city-region deals. Normally, these deals have business advisors with no decision-making powers. Here in Aberdeen, the council gave the oil tycoon Sir Ian Wood's One Company 1/3 of the voting rights over economic development. The deal was signed in 2016, the year after the Paris Agreement. Its stated aim was to anchor the oil and gas industry in the northeast of Scotland. 72% of the money went to the Oil and Gas Technology Centre. Sir Ian Wood said recently that it was only in the last 2 or 3 years that he realised that climate change was a serious problem. Most of the city region deal that should have been spent on diversifying the local economy just got blown. Investing heavily on a sunset industry was unwise. Business at the harbour has declined continuously since 2014. The hundreds of millions of pounds to build the harbour is borrowed money. Last year, it was within £1 to £1.5 million of breaching its banking covenant. So it got bailed out by a loan of 30 million from the Scottish National Investment Bank. The Harbour Board, One and Aberdeen City Council gambled on oil and gas. By 2019, it was clear the gamble was not going to pay off. Despite previous assurances to the people of Tory, the council's chief officer, City Growth, sent out a brief for an energy transition zone in May 2019, specifying a land search that included the park. This resulted in the feasibility study. The council's planning team altered established planning policies to allow development on the park, and it was rezoned for industry in the proposed local development plan on 2nd March 2020. In February 2021, a business plan prepared by One, Scottish Enterprise, Aberdeen Harbour Board and Aberdeen City Council for an energy transition zone was sent to the Westminster and Scottish governments, asking for £53 million of public money. Rishi Sunak gave them 27 million and the Scottish government 26 million. The business plan claims that if St Fitticks Park is opened up for development, Aberdeen will become the global energy capital for renewables. The claim is accompanied with fantasy job figures. This is simply wishful thinking. The park is small and has many constraints. It's nonsense to suggest that by sacrificing our park, Aberdeen can outcompete places like Port of Leith and Port of Cromarty. They already have the facilities and expertise. They're much larger and the sites are already developed. It's quite unsuitable for the only two purposes proposed by one ETZ, as a site for cable manufacturing or as a marshalling and assembly yard for offshore wind. One can only suppose that the governments, having backed the building of a white elephant, are determined to feed it bales of public money in the hope that it will all work out in the end, when the predictable result is much more likely to be large amounts of elephant excrement. Serene Woods One Company have now used the public money from the two governments to create another private company, ETZ Limited. ETZ Limited have in turn hired a consultancy, Ironside Farah, to master plan the area for an energy transition zone. Private business got to make the decisions, influence planning policy, and carry out the master planning. This is not democracy. Note that all of this happened while the park was protected green space, and all of it was funded by the public. Opportunities for public involvement have been restricted to the 12-week consultation on the local development plan, where over 200 people and 4 statutory consultees objected. There have been 2 consultation events hosted by Ironside Farah, resulting in large numbers of people universally condemning the plan. There's been a great deal of media attention, both national and international, but this has done little to slow the momentum of those who want to destroy the park. On 22nd September, we were informed that the Scottish Government reporter had decided that the park would be zoned for an energy transition zone, and that the economic benefits to the rest of the city and region outweighed the disbenefits to Tory. So that's the story of St Fitticks Park. A once sacred area was reduced to a state of degradation. A huge financial investment of mainly public money, time, and nature led to its recovery. Now those who profited from the oil industry claim that destroying this park is essential to save us from a situation knowingly caused by the oil industry. Gramsci wrote from a fascist prison cell in the 1930s, "The old world is dying, the new is struggling to be born. We live in a time of monsters." Almost a century later, humanity is once again at a crossroads. We can choose the one ETZ path to continue with the old dying world of exploitation of people and nature for short-term financial gain. That path leads to extinction. It has depleted our non-renewable natural resources. It has led to a global biodiversity crisis. It has contaminated the air we breathe, the water we drink, and the soil we grow our crops on. It has disrupted biogeochemical cycling. It has intensified economic inequalities. It has weakened our democratic institutions. It has changed the climate. Or we can choose to repair and nurture our damaged environment, learn to live within the constraints that nature imposes, and stop damaging our own life support system. St Fitticks Park shows what can be done if we make that choice. And our survival as a species demands that we choose that option. St Fitticks Park is more than a local problem. It's symbolic both of hope for the future and a reminder of the constant global threat we face. It shows that it's not too late to change. If we work with nature, we can repair some of the damage. St Fitticks also symbolises the unremitting danger posed by a greedy minority fixated on wealth and power who want control of the future. Saving the park will be a long and difficult battle, and the reporter's decision has been a setback. But we have made many friends and allies in the last 32 months. With their help and with yours, we can win.